welcome to yet another Barbie video essay. Last time I tried to deconstruct the movie Barbie and connect it with themes that I was interested in. I was using it as a means to look at society and history and philosophy. But inevitably the question comes up, what does the movie actually mean? Now this is a major theme in deconstruction. What is relevant to the reading of any particular object of analysis? Jacques Derrida, the founder of deconstruction, was famously quoted as saying, "There is nothing outside the text." By this he meant there's nothing outside context. There's nothing that's not in some way connected or relevant, but obviously not equally relevant. But the point is, how relevant each thing is open to interpretation. So if an author weighs in, for instance, or in this case, the writer of the movie, Greta and her husband Noah, and say, well, this is what we intended. Does that settle the question? Well, this is what the movie means. No, it does not. Because what they think they're doing may be different from what they are unconsciously motivated by. But even that unconscious psychological strata is only one level. One could maybe say that the whole universe is an aspect of our unconscious, but Derrida's point is everything is within the text, meaning everything is connected to everything else. So whether you consider it a psychological extrapolation, everything is mind, or not, is mind is another category. So it's not just psychological. It's not just textualizing the universe as being a great text, even though that has a long and respectful history in philosophy and science. The book of nature, we read it, interpreting nature as we would a text. It's not ridiculous. So with Barbie, the question of what it really means, there's no getting around that it's going to be some kind of creative interpretation, more or less so. But what the authors intended and what the actual contexts were in specific frameworks, for instance, the socio-cultural, the corporate, the political, all these things are relevant, I think, to what people mean, at least, by what the movie really means. And this movie in particular is very helpful for looking at this question because it is very contradictory or paradoxical, depending on your perspective. Now, artists can often mask a lot of confusion in their art. That's okay. They don't have to have it all worked out and be able to explain it. That's kind of the point. But great art, or a great text, is aware, or at least accounts for, some of those contradictions. To have a major contradictory message, and not even the level of subtext, but at the major level of plot, and have it be unacknowledged and unaccounted for, is particularly strange. And what's even stranger is the reaction of critics that don't seem to notice or care. The reaction tends to be, yeah, conservatives are mad that for the way that men are treated, and a lot of liberal-leaning critics are saying, well, you're not getting the point of the film. The reaction's so polarized that it seems like no one's getting that, well, there's a very real contradiction here. So much so that one wonders if this was intentional. Were they trying to provoke controversy? Were they trying to get men to maybe feel some kind of empathy towards the Kens as a kind of symbol of women in the Barbie land? That would make sense. And then if it was structured in a more artful, tragic way, we would feel sympathy for both the Barbies and the Kens. We would see them both in a sympathetic light and in an unsympathetic light, or we would see them one on top and then the other on top, which is kind of what is going on, right? That's kind of what we see. But instead of, in the end, Barbie learning, it wouldn't even have to be Ken and Barbie coming together in the end, and that could be very, very melodramatic. A tragedy or a comic tragedy could end in a number of different ways. A tragic comedy or comic tragedy could be them both realizing in some way that the power conflict was wrong or was not what they wanted. But the strange thing is that it's Ken that has this epiphany, that it's not what he really wanted. Ken actually learns the lesson of the whole central part of the plot, which is this power struggle. He says, it's not what I really wanted. Barbie doesn't seem to. Barbie wins in a very melodramatic way through manipulation, and she doesn't show any remorse, and then she just goes on to the next adventure of her self-actualization in the real world. In a way, we have to wonder if this was pressure from second wave feminists, Mattel, the studio, not wanting the movie to negate the quote-unquote second wave or modern feminist message of being able to beat men or be as successful as men or just being powerful in the world, which is contrary to the very third wave postmodern message of the final act of the film, which is be yourself, be a woman. It's okay. You don't have to have power in the world. And which would have been a natural outgrowth of a comic tragic or just a common sense development of that middle part of the plot, where we were actually very explicitly shown and told that the Barbies were cruel and repressive to the Kens. They didn't know where they lived, if they even had a home. So even when Ken does the one thing that is somewhat mean, he takes over Barbie's house. We've already been told he might not even have a house, so it doesn't really seem that mean. And he's not like telling her she can't live there. He's basically forcing her into the box of domesticity. That's his sin. Mattel is trying to force her into the box of being a model, an ideal. So it makes sense that the third wave, not being an ideal model, or being a traditional domestic mother, would lead to just being a woman. It would make sense to then negate those two. And Barbie does. She negates them. Like, I don't want to be with Ken. I don't want to be an ideal model. I just want to be a woman. But if that's the case, then why not apologize for the war, or at least come to some agreement that they should share power? Instead, she wins the war and moves on to the third wave. Second wave feminism is, one would say, it's not really repressing men and creating a matriarchy. They could have done it in a different way, but they weren't able to juggle these contrasting pressures, I assume. And that makes for a confusing and controversial film. Now, did they keep this contradiction in there as a way of stoking controversy? Was it a way of getting people to talk and argue about it? If so, I think that's unfortunate, because it's caused a lot of strife when they could have actually given a better message, and it would have been more artful. They could have actually shown some kind of complexity where, well, what do we want to do with this power struggle? It's great to have this third wave postmodern self-actualization message, but we still have to deal with the world and decide how to distribute power. And maybe we can't figure that out. Maybe that is too complex. And then that would be a tragedy. And then we could just say, well, I think this is maybe what they were thinking was, it's a work in progress. So women haven't achieved it in the real world. Men can try and achieve it in the Barbie world, but it's a long struggle, and it's not going to be solved in some easy way. But of course, we don't get that. We get Barbie winning the war, Barbies defeat the Kens, force them back into subjugation, and it's treated as a victory and not a tragedy. Barbie's eventual, then, affirmation and embrace of the real world only comes as a kind of additional afterthought from the main conflict of the film. And so if you had wanted that struggle for autonomy to be the main point and not the struggle for power, you would probably want the Kens to be just a distraction. Her turning away from the power struggle of relationships towards affirming her authenticity in the real world, not the world of abstractions, not Barbie land, the world of ideal models where we struggle over who's right and who's wrong, who's on top and who's not. Or, if they had wanted to make the movie actually anti-man, they would have made the Kens look really bad. They wouldn't have made them so sympathetic. Sure, they show them Ken takes over her house. That's kind of mean. And he tries to force her into domesticity. But when the Kens take power, they do so as a group. They did so in collaboration with the women, turning it into a big frat party. And they weren't really taking care of the world. And so their only really anti-man message to me seems to be, yeah, if women just went back to not struggling for power and doing what the man says, it would be just a party, and like serious civilization would happen. They would just be hanging out, and we would have a kind of pre-modern society. But it's almost like the movie is saying that women, through their own power struggle, through their own manipulation of men, causing jealousies and whatnot, causing wars between the men, that creates a more modern society where men and women are trying to be important. Men are important more explicitly in a lot of modern history, but women perhaps behind the scenes manipulating them to get power in some way. It's not a crazy reading. The women are explicitly shown to be, there's nothing more cruel, emotionally cruel anyway, than waiting till somebody really likes you and then stabbing them in the heart, figuratively. Pretending to get a text message and then stoking the jealousy at that very moment that they're vulnerable. Like, that's much more cruel than anything the Kens do. So, is it anti-man or anti-woman? I don't think so. I think the heart of the film is some intuition that the writers have that love and sex in modern society is inescapably power obsessed. You get this in fetish culture, right? You have people just playing power games, mind games, keep on playing those. Love's the answer, right? It should have been the answer, but it's not, because we haven't modeled that in society, and the movie didn't know how to. And so it is modeling perhaps the best alternative that they could think of, which was, we can't figure this out. Love and sex are all about playing these power and mind games. I'm on top, you're on top. I don't want it anymore. I just want to be at peace. And I think there's an intuition there that that's the best way, if that's what love and sex are. But that is not what love and sex have to be. There is a component of power that's inescapably tied up with sex, especially in romance and love. But it's not the path to just avoid it and to leave it the way that it is, because that leaves the world the way it is. And I would argue there is an element that Barbie Land was, at the beginning, yes, a reflection and an inversion at the same time. And so it's anti-man, it's anti-woman, it's anti-love. It's none of these. It's a complex film, and I appreciate it the more that I think about it, even if I think they ultimately could not figure out the solution, which, admittedly, not many people in the culture can. But that's a subject for another video. Thanks for watching.